Welcome to Novara Live with me, Michael Walker. I don't have a co-host this evening, but I do have two brilliant guests. In the first part of the show, I speak to Gazan playwright Ahmed Najjar about Trump's stated plan to ethnically cleanse Gaza. That's the main theme of tonight's show. In the second half of the show, though, I have an interview with former Greek finance minister Yannis Varoufakis. With Yanis, we talk about everything from Trump's trade wars to techno-feudalism. So do stay tuned for all of that. Also, while, as I've said, I don't have a co-host tonight, Ash Sarkar will be present in spirit. That's because she was on BBC Politics Live today and called out the inability of the Labour and Tory MPs present to describe Trump's plans as ethnic cleansing. We'll show you how that went down. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has long described US President Donald Trump as Israel's greatest friend. And it was during a visit by Netanyahu to Washington that Trump made good on that description with this shock announcement last night.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out, create an economic development that will supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing for the people of the area. Do a real job, do something different. Just can't go back. If you go back, it's going to end up the same way it has for 100 years.
Now, you might have heard that and thought that when Trump talks about economic development and housing for the people of the area, he means for Palestinians, the people whose home it is, the people whose land it is. We'll think again.
I also strongly believe that the Gaza Strip, which has been a symbol of death and destruction for so many decades and so bad for the people anywhere near it, and especially those who live there, and frankly, who's been really very unlucky. It's been very unlucky. It's been an unlucky place for a long time. Being in its presence just has not been good, and it should not go through a process of rebuilding and occupation by the same people that have really stood there and fought for it and lived there and died there and lived a miserable existence there. Instead, we should go to other countries of interest with humanitarian hearts, and there are many of them that want to do this, and build various domains that will ultimately be occupied by the 1.8 million Palestinians living in Gaza, ending the death and destruction and, frankly, bad luck.
So you can see Netanyahu there. He probably thinks he's having a sort of a dream, right? This is what he has wanted for decades, right? When we've talked about the genocidal war on Gaza, this has seemed to be, if you could find a war plan there, it was this, right? Destroy Gaza to such an extent that the people will have no choice to leave, right? And now Donald Trump is saying, let's kick them all out. They're having a terrible time anyway. Let's kick them all out. Let's just do some ethnic cleansing, right? I'm a deal maker. Let's sign a deal. Let's ethnically cleanse Gaza, right? What's the problem with that? That's what he's saying. Netanyahu's there thinking, this is brilliant, right? This is why I didn't listen to Joe Biden. This is why, I say listen to, obviously Joe Biden gave his consent for everything that happened, but this is why I suppose he didn't go out of his way to make Joe Biden look like he had any authority. I think he humiliated Joe Biden, really. Now Donald Trump is in office and Donald Trump is giving him everything he ever wanted, promising him his wildest dreams will come true. Trump likes to talk. Let's see if he's got any more detail about where he thinks, in his bizarre plan, Gaza's Palestinians would be resettled.
This can be paid for by neighboring countries of great wealth. It could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 12. It could be numerous sites, or it could be one large site. But the people will be able to live in comfort and peace, and we'll make sure something really spectacular is done. They're going to have peace. They're not going to be shot at and killed and destroyed like this civilization of wonderful people has had to endure. The only reason the Palestinians want to go back to Gaza is they have no alternative. It's right now a demolition site. This is just a demolition site. Virtually every building is down. They're living under fallen concrete that's very dangerous and very precarious. They instead can occupy all of a beautiful area with homes and safety, and they can live out their lives in peace and harmony instead of having to go back and do it again.
So again, this is Netanyahu's wildest dream, right? You've got Donald Trump saying it's a demolition site. Now, obviously, why is it a demolition site? Because Netanyahu has been bombing the strip to smithereens for 15 months. But now it's a win-win for him, right? I got to bomb the place. That gave me some political popularity in my country. I got to look like a strong man because we were killing the Palestinians, which seems to be very popular in Israel. And now it's win-win because not only do I get to kill and bomb them, but then I can use the result as an excuse to say why they should leave. Oh, the humanitarian thing would be for them to leave after I destroyed the whole place, right? Netanyahu standing there as Trump, we say gives him or says everything he would like to hear from an American president, because we're going to discuss how realistic any of this is. It's not really. Let's look at this sort of step by step there, because there are three parts to this plan, it seems. First, forcibly remove Palestinians from the territory in Gaza and away from their compatriots in the occupied West Bank. Second, potentially divide the population amongst anywhere between 1 and 12 sites in neighboring countries, effectively destroying their identity as a people. So, well, I can move to 12 sites, a few of them here, a few of them there. Third, make a massive land grab, declaring Gaza US territory, have the US in control of it. Now, every single phase of that proposal, every part of that proposal is a violation of several international laws. And together, they very, very clearly constitute ethnic cleansing. That's the forced and permanent removal of an ethnic group from their own land. Now, if you can't quite believe what you're hearing, what you heard there, you're not alone. Journalists in the room were in shock too.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister. You are talking tonight about the United States taking over a sovereign territory. What authority would allow you to do that? Are you talking about a permanent occupation there?
I do see a long-term ownership position, and I see it bringing great stability to that part of the Middle East and maybe the entire Middle East. And everybody I've spoken to, this was not a decision made lightly. Everybody I've spoken to loves the idea of the United States owning that piece of land, developing and creating thousands of jobs with something that will be magnificent in a really magnificent area that nobody would know. Nobody can look because all they see is death and destruction and rubble and demolished buildings falling all over. It's just a terrible sight. I've studied it. I've studied this very closely over a lot of months, and I've seen it from every different angle. And it's a very, very dangerous place to be. And it's only going to get worse. And I think this is an idea that's gotten tremendous, and I'm talking about from the highest level of leadership, gotten tremendous praise. And if the United States can help to bring stability and peace in the Middle East, we'll do that.
So the shock actually from the journalist, I think there wasn't necessarily so much about the ethnic cleansing plan, but the idea that the US would control Gaza. Because obviously there's a history of the United States trying to sort of occupy and do state building in the Middle East, and it hasn't gone very well. In fact, Donald Trump is usually, or has usually been in recent years, a vocal critic of the idea that the Americans can just sort of go take over a strip of land, control it, socially engineer what happens there and hope for the best. Right? He's normally said that's a disaster for American national interests. Seems as if he's making an exception here because his friend Netanyahu is there and he will do anything for him. Right? This is very difficult to see how this would be in America's national interest for America to say, well, we'll control it. We'll take it on. Because again, one thing we've been discussing on this show sort of throughout the war against Gaza is there's always been this sort of claim from the West that what they want is sort of the international community to come and take over Gaza and govern it. No one really wants to do that, right? No one really wants to do that. Because it's going to be incredibly difficult because Israel doesn't want it to be a functioning state that works, right? How do you sort of try and help rebuild a state with your hands completely tied behind your backs? Also, Israel working on this premise and sort of lots of the international community working on this premise that they can't possibly work with Hamas. Hamas haven't been destroyed. They're still probably the force in Gaza that has the most legitimacy. So it would be a real poison chalice. Of course, none of this would be a problem if you clear out the Palestinians, which is Trump's plan. According to Trump's proposals, Gaza would be emptied of Palestinians who will be forced into smaller enclaves in countries like Jordan and Egypt. And of course, that begs the question, who would move in to replace them? On this question, Trump was actually quite cagey.
I envision a world, people living there, the world's people. I think you'll make that into an international, unbelievable place. I think the potential in the Gaza Strip is unbelievable. And I think the entire world, representatives from all over the world will be there, and they'll live there. Palestinians also. Palestinians will live there. Many people will live there. But they've tried the other, and they've tried it for decades and decades and decades. It's not going to work. It didn't work. It will never work. And you have to learn from history. History has, you just can't let it keep repeating itself. We have an opportunity to do something that could be phenomenal. And I don't want to be cute. I don't want to be a wise guy, but the Riviera of the Middle East, this could be something that could be so bad. This could be so magnificent. But more importantly than that is the people that have been absolutely destroyed that live there now can live in peace in a much better situation because they're living in hell. And those people will now be able to live in peace. We'll make sure that it's done world class. It'll be wonderful for the people. Palestinians mostly we're talking about. And I have a feeling that despite them saying no, I have a feeling that the king in Jordan and that the general president, but that the general in Egypt will open their hearts and will give us the kind of land that we need to get this done. And people can live in harmony and in peace.
Again, you've got Netanyahu there sort of standing smugly as Donald Trump talks about how Gaza has been completely destroyed and therefore it's very unpleasant to live there, right? And he was like, oh, I did that. And it's all working out for me. The idea that Egypt and Jordan are going to change their mind, I mean, Donald Trump has to cling to that because sort of apart from the fact that this is clearly a violation of international law, openly ethnic cleansing, just on sort of practical terms, it can't work unless you have agreement for where these people will go. And Egypt and Jordan have long stated, they've been very, very, very clear that they would not be prepared to take in the population of Gaza, right? They've said they won't do that. Jordan is in fact already home to around 2 million Palestinians, mostly the descendants of those forcibly displaced from their property during the Nakba of 1948. Many of them have citizenship, though Jordan continues to consider them refugees with the right to return. But around 500,000 later Palestinian refugees to Jordan don't have Jordanian nationality. Many of them live in refugee camps. And Jordan is hardly a paradise for them. So this is important to know because people are saying, well, they have a terrible time in Gaza, so why can't they just move to another country? Surely that will be nicer. Now, when you forcibly expel people from their countries, and I mean, this would be making them stateless, right? Because they would no longer, I suppose they would be Palestinians, but Gaza would now be occupied by whoever has enough money to go there. I mean, that's what it sounded like from Donald Trump. So this idea, we'll just move them somewhere else. That's the kind thing to do. Let's look at how you do get treated if you are a refugee who's forcibly expelled from your land. So this is from the Minority Rights Group, an NGO, talking about life for Palestinians in Jordan. Palestinians remain vastly underrepresented in government. Discrimination against Palestinians in private and state sector employment remains common, and a quota system limits the number of university admissions for Palestinian youth. The challenges are even more severe for Palestinians without Jordanian nationality, who are effectively stateless. Children are unable to benefit from free primary and secondary education and face higher costs and competition for the limited university spaces available to non-nationals. Non-Jordanians are also disadvantaged in the labour market and cannot enter professions such as law and engineering, since membership in professional associations requires Jordanian citizenship. Without citizenship, Palestinians also face problems buying and selling property, opening a bank account, and completing other daily tasks. The background here, in part, is that Jordan has quite a sort of fragile ethnic balance, and the monarchy in Jordan always felt that sort of if there was too big a Palestinian presence, and it was a Palestinian presence that had equal citizenship rights, that would threaten their rule. And this is not rare, right, for a country in the region, or a country anywhere really, to sort of think that if you have a mass expulsion of a people into that country, it will have a destabilizing effect, right? It often does. And when we sort of hear of sort of Jordan and Egypt saying, they won't accept this, in part, that's because They might think it's ethnic cleansing. I think the main reason is because they think it will be destabilizing to their state, right? They're not necessarily doing the Palestinians sort of a favor when they say we won't take them here. They're not necessarily standing up there and being very moral when they say that. But for pragmatic, self-interested reasons, they think it would be destabilizing to, I suppose, agree to the ethnic cleansing of almost 2 million Palestinians in Gaza. Also worth noting, he keeps saying 1.8 million people now. The population of Gaza was about 2.2 or 2.3 million, I think, before the war. So does he know how many people actually died? I mean, is that what we can read into that? Responding to Trump's proposals, both Jordan and Egypt have made clear again they weren't interested. They've said this time and time again. And this was actually floated much earlier in the war. I think sort of the Biden administration didn't think it was a bad idea. They didn't stand up and say it should happen in the way that Trump did. But I think they sort of tried to see what opinion was in the region. And the Egyptians and the Jordanians have consistently said no. Palestinian representatives have also been clear that the people of Gaza do not want to leave their land. And this was Palestinian ambassador to the UN, Riyad Mansour, responding to Trump.
Our country and our home is the Gaza Strip. It's part of Palestine. We have no home. For those who want to send them to a happy, nice place, let them go back, to their original homes inside Israel. There are nice places there, and they will be happy to return to these places. But in the meantime, our homeland is our homeland. If part of it is destroyed, the Gaza Strip, the Palestinian people selected the choice to return to it. In 2 days, in a span of few hours, 400,000 Palestinians walking returned to the northern part of the Gaza Strip. I think that we should be respecting the selections and the wishes of the Palestinian people.
And one other wrinkle in Trump's plan is that Hamas remains a presence inside Gaza. So responding to the proposal put forward by Trump, Hamas accused him of pouring oil on the fire. A spokesperson said this: "Our people in the Gaza Strip will not allow these plans to pass. What is required is to end the Israeli occupation and aggression against our people, not to expel them from their land." That opposition from Hamas suggests, unsurprisingly, that if the US wants to claim Gaza, it will require military action, right? You can't just say, okay, we're here now, we're in control, right? They will face an insurgency. And that led to this question for Trump from the press.
Mr. President, given what you've said about Gaza, should the U.S. send troops to help secure the security vacuum?
As far as Gaza is concerned, we'll do what is necessary. If it's necessary, we'll do that. We're going to take over that piece, and we're going to develop it, create thousands and thousands of jobs, and it'll be something that the entire Middle East can be very proud of.
Now, given Trump pledged throughout last year's election there would be no more foreign wars, right? That answer will be a surprise to many who voted for him. Do you remember when sort of there was that the takeover in Syria by Jelani, who you might have seen on Twitter, is now going to do an interview with Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart. That'll be very interesting to watch. But Trump was very clear when he sort of tweeted, "This is not our business. Let's not get involved." Right? And that seemed somewhat sensible, right? Finally, there was a president who was saying, you know what, maybe the best thing to do is just to stick out, stay out of it. And now Trump is literally saying to get control of this small strip of land, doesn't have that much strategic importance. It does to Israel, but it doesn't really to anyone else, right? He is happy to do whatever it takes. Send American troops, send Americans to their deaths if it needs to be, right? It's completely the opposite of everything else he's been saying. And it just so happens to be what he says when Netanyahu is standing next to him, right? The rules suddenly changed. You'll have noticed in those videos, Benjamin Netanyahu, I've mentioned him a bunch of times now, obviously the man behind the carnage that led to Gaza's current state, looks pretty pleased with himself in all of those clips. And we haven't heard him speak yet. Here's what he said about Trump's plan.
I mentioned again tonight our three goals. And the third goal is to make sure that Gaza never poses a threat to Israel again. President Trump is taking it to a much higher level. He sees a different future for that piece of land that has been the focus of so much terrorism, so many attacks against us, so many trials and so many tribulations. He has a different idea. And I think it's worth paying attention to this. We're talking about it. He's exploring it with his people, with his staff. I think it's something that could change history. And it's worthwhile really pursuing this avenue.
I mean, that just seems completely disingenuous. Essentially, maybe we should take this idea seriously. I mean, this is clearly what Netanyahu has wanted, I mean, forever, for his whole goddamn career, right? To clear Gaza out of Palestinians, right? If you're looking for a logic of the last 15 months of genocidal war against the Palestinians, making it unlivable is really the only outcome that makes sense. Why else would you destroy? I mean, the estimates seem to vary between 60 and 90% of the buildings, destroy or damage in Gaza. If that wasn't your intention, right? Why else would you sort of go to those lengths to destroy everything, destroy the water supplies, destroy the educational facilities, right? It's because ultimately your plan is for those people to leave, to kick them out. And now Donald Trump has sort of said, probably, word for word what Netanyahu has been asking. And now he said, oh, that's a good idea. Maybe we should take that seriously. Netanyahu, of course, isn't the only Israeli politician praising the plan. This was Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich's reaction. The plan presented yesterday by President Trump is the true answer to October the 7th. Whoever committed the most terrible massacre on our land will find himself losing his land forever. That's a war crime. Now we will act to finally bury, with God's help, the dangerous idea of a Palestinian state. The dangerous idea of a Palestinian state. Now, this is the finance minister of Israel. Right, so when people say, "Oh, this is you can't compare Israel to Hamas," right? One is a liberal democracy, one is a terrorist group. He's literally saying the idea of these people having what is their right, according to the UN, a state, is itself dangerous. I mean, he's openly calling for ethnic cleansing. So I mean, every single sentence in this is shocking. But yeah, this is who Donald Trump standing there next to Netanyahu like he's this normal guy. Right? I love this guy. A war criminal who's hanging out with people who, I mean, nothing that Bezalel Smotrich says here is not exactly what Netanyahu believes. So, to be honest, the distinction between them is more blurry than many, I suppose, liberal Zionists in the West would like to pretend. The plan appeared to receive support from Israeli politicians across the political spectrum. As I say, this line is very blurry between the far right and the right of Israeli politics. Obviously, with some notable exceptions, the Arab members of the Knesset weren't in favor. International reaction has been largely one of condemnation. Israel has been keen to normalize relations with Saudi Arabia. And that's, of course, a legacy of the Abraham Accords from Trump's first administration. That now looks in jeopardy with the Saudis saying this. Saudi Arabia rejects any attempt to displace the Palestinians from their land. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has affirmed the kingdom's position in a clear and explicit manner that does not allow for any interpretation under any circumstances. Even UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer appeared to oppose Trump's proposals, saying this, the Palestinians, must be allowed home, they must be allowed to rebuild, and we should be with them in that rebuild on the way to a two-state solution. Labour sort of, again, talking, we want a two-state solution, but we oppose anything that might force Israel to allow that to happen. We'd love a two-state solution, but boycotting Israel, oh, that's a bit beyond the pale, isn't it? That's a bit suspicious. But we're just going to keep asking them for a two-state solution, even though people in government talk about the idea of a Palestinian state as if it was sort of this dangerous spectre. And you've got them all saying, we want to clear out these people. Well, I mean, they might be planning ethnic cleansing. They might have done a genocidal war. But, boycotting Israeli goods, and it's a bit much, isn't it? Gaza, of course, is just one of the Palestinian territories. Others include the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and with large parts of both under Israeli occupation. And since, I suppose, all really under Israeli occupation. And since the ceasefire in Gaza, Israel has been ramping up hostilities against Palestinians in West Bank cities like Jenin. Trump was asked about the future of those territories too.
Do you support Israeli sovereignty, Judea and Samaria, areas which many believe is the biblical homeland of the Jewish people?
Well, we're discussing that with many of your representatives. You're represented very well. And people do like the idea, but we haven't taken a position on it yet. But we'll be making an announcement probably on that very specific topic over the next 4 weeks.
It sounds like in the next 4 weeks, first of all, he's going to say, let's ethnically cleanse all of Gaza. and we'll kick out the Palestinians, build some nice hotels. And in the next 4 weeks also, because presents come in twos, we will say that Israel can annex the West Bank. That's what that sounded like, right? To discuss developments over the past 24 hours, earlier today, I was joined by UK-based Gazan playwright Ahmed Najjar. He has family in refugee camps in northern Gaza. I began by asking him how he felt, what his response was to Trump's press conference with Netanyahu last night.
I felt sick in my stomach to see Netanyahu, who was responsible for the genocide in Gaza, sitting next to Trump, and Trump is casually talking about the destruction and the death that has been caused in Gaza, and that Gaza is livable at the moment, not livable, and people should leave it. While the guy who has done all of this is right next to him, I just felt sick, really, and it's further dehumanizing of the Palestinians in Gaza to try and actually even think of this one or suggest it, to try and say, to kind of try and show that you can genocide the people and also dehumanize them further and suggest that they should be living somewhere else is better for them, and frame it as if you care about them. Is sickening. I really have no words to describe to you how sickening it is for me to see these scenes. And what's even more sickening for me is a lot of the Western media has not even said the word ethnic cleansing, that Trump is suggesting ethnic cleansing. And that is even further dehumanizing the Palestinians, further sickening for us. And I don't know what else we as Palestinians can do to kind of like show the world that what's going on is completely against every human rights convention, human rights laws, and all kinds. I mean, we Palestinians don't really know how to react to these big, massive powers that target us and want to ethnically cleanse us from our own land.
And I know you currently have family in Gaza, as far as I understand it, in refugee camps in northern Gaza. Could you talk about the situation they're in right now? Were they sort of able to return home? Do they still have homes?
They returned back, and we have 7 homes for my siblings and my parents. The 7 of them are destroyed. One is burned down, and they're trying to fix it and to make it a bit more possible to live in. The others are completely destroyed, so they're trying to salvage whatever they can from the furniture and what have you. And they have erected some tents on the top of the rubble and decided to stay there until they see what they will do, and until if there is some sort of construction materials to try and get them in, and they start sort of rebuilding to make it a bit more livable. I mean, there's a lot of people who started kind of like, including my family, try to fix the place as much as they can. Obviously, the damage is huge, massive, especially that the infrastructure is completely destroyed. And the problem comes with the sewage and the system, the infrastructure, and how people are going to manage that. And people tend to go into like sort of sorting out an individual one for the sewage, digging holes in the ground and building up their own sewage system.
Do you have a sense of how many people, if they had the opportunity, would want to leave? Obviously, we need to premise this on what's happened is just incredibly unjust, a genocidal war, a massive breach of international law. At the same time, in lots of conflicts, so say Syria, for example, when Aleppo was being bombed, sort of the scenes of the city looked a bit like the scenes we're seeing of Gaza now, or Mosul. Yeah. People could leave, right? And that was, one of the reasons why the genocidal war on Gaza has been so deadly, is because people can't leave. Yeah. And because of the specific situations in Palestine, where you've got a sort of a government in Israel that wants to ethnically cleanse the place, no one has been sort of demanding we need to offer refuge to these people. And there is a sense of sort of the Palestinians sort of being trapped in the middle of this dreadful situation. If people did have the opportunity to go somewhere, if there were people or were a country offering Palestinians in Gaza refuge, how many people do you think would consider that?
There's one thing about the Palestinians that is very different from other nations in the region, that the Palestinians know what it means, exactly what it means to be a refugees. And they know very much, and throughout a very long history since the Nakba 1948, and what it means to be living in other people's countries as a refugee. And that will play a very crucial role for people's decision whether they will leave or not, because of the experience that they have, of the experience that it has been passed down to them from their parents and grandparents. I also talk about myself here. My parents were kicked out from their hometown in what's called now Israel, and we know how bitter it is to be ethnically cleansed. So I think there will be a massive resistance against leaving, but also people will be more sort of insisting on and remaining, because they know that means the end of the Palestinian nation as such. So they might. I think the feeling right now, as I speak to my family and friends in Gaza, is more about like, we want to stay. It's our land. It's where we belong, and we are not going to leave. Bearing in mind that people know what it might be for them to go to Egypt or Jordan, I think it will be very, very difficult, and they will be in a very bad status for sure, under very strict rules, and they might not even be allowed to leave the camp, or they put them in camps and they might not be able to leave the camps or what have you. I mean, I think about it like, also take my father as an example. He stayed in the Jabalia in the north of Gaza until the building has really collapsed on him, and he was very lucky to be alive. And he was pulled out from the building. He refused to leave, refused at all to leave. And there are thousands of people have refused, really, really strongly refused to leave. So having said that, I think there will be people who will leave. But also the fact that we are now, it's very, very clear and very explicit from the US, the states and Israel, that they want to ethnically cleanse Gaza. The people who were in between whether to leave or to stay, now they want to stay. So they have actually somehow indirectly made us a favor to make people even hold stronger in the land and staying there.
Donald Trump has obviously expressed one vision for the future of Gaza, one of ethnic cleansing. I suppose I wanted to ask you what you see as, I suppose, possible futures. I mean, there's one question, which is what ideally you would like to see, and then what you think, you might see that seems to be in the realms of possibility. How do you sort of see the future of Gaza in the near term or the medium term?
I think his plan of ethnically cleansing Gaza is going to fail, especially that the people of Gaza don't want to leave, and the surrounding countries are rejecting the entire idea. So I think it's going to fail. And then the thing that I fear, that the people will suffer by not allowing the basic needs and the construction materials to come into Gaza. Bearing in mind that Gazan people are well educated, and I mean, we have more university graduates than anywhere else in the world, and for sure our literacy in Gaza is much higher rate than the USA. So we are, the people will build Gaza. The people will rise. The people of Gaza will rise from the ash and build it. The only thing that they need is for the aid to be allowed in. And to be the freedom of movement, and they will rise and they will build it. I have no doubt whatsoever that the people themselves will rebuild Gaza and better than what it was. So I do hope that materialize. I don't really think his plan will work. The only, as I mentioned, the only way it will work is if they allow the genocide to come back in, and then they start, murdering people in mass. And that their plan might work, given that the rate of killing we might be talking about 1 million or so of people being killed. Apart from that, I don't see how is it going to work. He's talking about building beautiful places for the people of Gaza. Where and how long that will take, and where will people go? Why don't you just build them in Gaza itself? It just doesn't. It sounds ridiculous. Maybe it's their fantasy. Also, I sometimes think that it might be a technique that he's using to add pressure on Gaza to accept some kind of terms and conditions that they are hoping for the Gaza people to accept. So I'm not sure what their end goal on that as such, given the fact that is in a practical level is extremely difficult. So are they aware of this, or are they really being arrogant and think that they can do whatever they want?
US President Donald Trump's proposal to permanently move the entire Palestinian population out of Gaza, to deny them a right of return and to claim their territory for the United States, has sent shockwaves through the political and media class. But their focus appears to have been on Trump's proposals to seize the territory. The Financial Times describes it as a plan to take over Gaza. For the BBC, it's Trump's Gaza takeover proposal. And The Guardian also takes the key part of Trump's announcement to be his plan to take over the Strip. Now, these are all framings that put that emphasis on who will govern Gaza and who will own it, with little concern for the Palestinians who currently live there and to whom it belongs. And even when the fate of Palestinians is the focus, the wording is a little mealy-mouthed. So for The Independent, Trump merely wants to relocate Palestinians. The Associated Press opts for the genteel word relocate to, and Washington's The Hill goes for the even more euphemistic term resettlement. Now, many of our politicians have been equally vague. On Politics Live, Labour MP Andrew Peaks and Tory MP Gareth Davies both objected to Trump's Gaza proposal, but couldn't say exactly why.
Let's be clear, hostages and Palestinians have been through 14 months of living hell. The only thing we should be talking about is how do we get the rest of the hostages out and Palestinians, ordinary Palestinians, back into Gaza. Question for me, and the British government's been really clear on this is the right for Palestinians to go back to their homes, and how we get the world community working together to put the money in there to rebuild Gaza. There's no sustainable peace unless we have economic investment in Gaza to rebuild the homes, the schools, the houses, to give stability for Palestinians who have it is their homeland, and we need to get people back there safely.
I don't think it is for one country to dictate terms in this way, but we'll look very carefully at all proposals, and I think it's for this government to engage with the administration, but also to determine what role the UK can play in the reconstruction of Gaza.
We'll look very carefully at all proposals. He's just called, Trump, for the ethnic cleansing of 2 million people. We'll just look at all proposals. Now, all that waffle meant it was up to Novara Media's Ash Sarkar to cut through the crime at the heart of Trump's proposals.
I'm sorry, I was just listening to you both speak, and it's like we've got two of the three monkeys. You've got see no evil, we've got hear no evil. Neither one of you are using the words which are relevant to this proposal, which is what is on the table as ethnic cleansing. When you are talking about the permanent resettlement of an entire ethnic group from the place they call home, that's called ethnic cleansing. And instead it's like, oh, what about the hostages? Oh, what about investment? I'm sorry, it's like Westminster is on the slow train and you're not keeping up with the pace of change.
Although this has come as something of a surprise to most people, I would have thought, since it's a dramatic change of policy.
It's a dramatic change of policy, but I think that the signs have been there for a long time. One is that the position of the Israeli government and the ruling Likud party has been to talk about resettling Gaza, and that's been from early in 2024. Secondly, you've got the ramping up of rhetoric around the annexation of the West Bank and the escalation of violence being perpetrated by the Israeli state with the cooperation of the Palestinian Authority, it must be said.
So what would Keir Starmer, what would you expect the British Prime Minister to do or say at this point?
So the first thing is that we need a total arms embargo on Israel. While we supply a small portion of the weapons that are used by Israel, I think it sends an important signal. Two, I think we need to commit to holding Netanyahu and his government to account for the war crimes that they have perpetuated. And thirdly, I think that one of the things that needs to happen is you need to look at things like boycotts, divestment and sanctions.
All right, well,
when you've got a government which is planning on committing ethnic cleansing, you need to punish them.
Now, everything Ash said there was so moderate, right? So reasonable. If that was a conversation about Russia and Ukraine, everyone on the panel would have said what Ash said. And if there was any of them that sort of expressed any doubt over that, they would say, you're a Putin apologist. But when it comes to Israel, Palestine, right? The idea, when someone proposes ethnic cleansing, you say, oh, we'll have to look at that proposal. Or if you're the Labour politician, you say, oh, well, we think that the hostages have had a difficult time, the Palestinians have had a difficult time, let's have some investment, let's have a two-state solution that no one wants, right? What Ash was saying there was so moderate, so reasonable, right? And everyone's like, oh, this is a bit extreme, isn't it? What's she talking about? Right? It's only when it comes to Israel-Palestine that kind of incredibly sensible, normal, liberal, right? Nothing that Ash said there was remotely radical. She's saying that if you have a country which is breaching international law in such a clear and brazen way as Israel, first of all, stop sending them arms. Two, boycott and sanction them, right? That's what we did to Russia. When it comes to Israel, for some reason, that's seen as beyond the pale. That's seen as radical. That's seen as something that's what lefties want, right? Well, that's weird. No, that's completely normal, or it should be completely normal. Yannis Varoufakis is uniquely placed to provide insight on the extraordinary developments we've seen in Trump's first 2 weeks back in the White House. Yes, it has only been 2 weeks. As a former Greek finance minister during the Eurozone crisis, Yanis has first-hand experience of the kind of high-level brinkmanship Trump is pursuing with his neighbours. And as an academic economist, he was a vocal critic of the imbalanced global trading system, which Trump is apparently trying to upend. Do they have something in common there? And as an author and political commentator, he has theorized the rising power of a Silicon Valley elite. In his 2023 book, Varoufakis suggested we were entering a period called techno-feudalism, or which he calls techno-feudalism. Now, if that book had been published 2 years later, that infamous photo of Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, and Jeff Bezos standing together at Trump's inauguration could surely have been a perfect fit for the cover of that techno-feudalism. You've got the three richest men in the world, all tech oligarchs with the president. In this conversation with Yanis, we cover all of those themes, but I began by asking him to respond to Donald Trump's stated ambition to ethnically cleanse Gaza and have the United States take control of the Strip.
Where does one start to express one's horror, amusement, a combination of the two? In one fell swoop, he destroyed international law, the Geneva Conventions, everything that the West supposedly treasured since 1945. The establishment of the principle that you don't just announce that you're going to annex somebody else's territory. But then again, we must never forget that Donald Trump likes to troll us. He baits us. He says things that are intentionally outrageous to destabilize us. And we must not succumb to the temptation to become destabilized. The facts on the ground are very clear. We have a state of apartheid in Israel. Since 1948, we've had an ongoing process of ethnically cleansing the Palestinians. This has evolved into a full-out, fully blown genocide. Trump was making those remarks with the criminally indicted Netanyahu sitting next to him. Netanyahu has a very long history, 20, 25 years, of wiping the floor clean with every American president that he worked with, essentially ridiculing them, running rings around them, and destroying any possibility of a two-state solution, or trying to destroy it, very efficiently, I must add. And there comes Trump with his recruitment strategy for MAGA, which is to outrage everyone, to destabilize us. But that strategy coalesces beautifully, resonates beautifully with, or horribly, with Netanyahu's project of destroying the Palestinian people, of destroying the chances of Israeli Jews to live peacefully, to live safely within Israel in a state of peace. So I am struggling to restrain myself from being outraged, because my outrage is Trump's success and part of his recruitment policy for MAGA, as I mentioned. We need unity amongst progressives all over the world, especially in Israel. We need not to lose sight of the amazing work that South Africa has been doing in utilizing international law and the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice to restore faith in humanity, in our own capacity to do something about the genocide which is unfolding in real time on our screens.
And I mean, do you think we should take it at all seriously? Because I suppose with Trump, there's a tendency to think he is just sort of flooding the zone with shit. I mean, he can't sort of say, let's ethnically cleanse Gaza and it happened, because he would need Egypt or Jordan or someone else on side, right? Because the Americans aren't going to take all of these people. So do you think he's almost trying to distract us from a sort of more realistic plan? Or do you think it is sort of important for us to take him at his word and say, this is really outrageous?
We have to be dialectical. We have to combine simultaneously a capacity to listen seriously to what he says. So, for instance, when he was going on about taking over Canada, at first, most Canadians thought it was a joke. And then we realized that it wasn't a joke, that he actually meant it. And there are repercussions to that. Even if he doesn't actually take over Canada, you can see that from his perspective, from his electoral basis perspective, he's already won a small victory, but nevertheless a victory, by humiliating the Canadians, by forcing them to the table with his tariffs. So he has this strategy of being intentionally outrageous, of causing you either to not take seriously what he says, which is a mistake, or to take too seriously what he says, which is also a mistake. He creates this kerfuffle. And then, however, he's also shown signs in the past of settling for something far smaller than that which he had pronounced, proclaimed, and demanded.
And I wanted to talk to you specifically about the tariffs, really, because there's something interesting about the way Donald Trump speaks, because he's always complaining about surplus countries, so countries with a trade surplus basically exploiting everyone else, right? And that is, on the face of it, one of his justifications for these tariffs. So Canada does have a surplus with the United States, so does Mexico, so does China, and so does the EU, which seems like that's why those are his sort of four big priorities. Obviously, he's now sort of paused the Canada and Mexico one, so it's all a little bit confusing. But where I was going with this is that you yourself, and both when you were sort of Greek finance minister and in your book, The Global Miner Tour before that, you were also very critical of countries that ran consistent trade surpluses for a similar reason, right? You thought that they were kind of exploiting other countries for their own benefit. Do you have something in common with Donald Trump on this?
Let me slightly rephrase your expression before I sink in the depths of depression by the comparison with Donald Trump. I have never said that countries that have a consistent, permanent surplus with other countries are exploiting them for their own benefit. My criticism, for instance, in the context of the European Union, of the German trade surpluses, not only vis-à-vis the United States, but also vis-à-vis the United Kingdom and Greece, is that ultimately they are bad for the people of Germany. They are universally bad. They are doing damage both to the countries that have a deficit in relation to, but also to Germany itself. I am happy to repeat this for China. I do believe that these perpetual large surpluses that China is reporting, is creating, are in the end a form of class war within China, with the majority of the Chinese suffering as a result. So I reject wholeheartedly the zero-sum approach of Donald Trump, that whatever is in the interest of, or whatever does damage to the Americans must be in the interest of Germany or of China. That is rubbish. For me, you see, let me put it simply, in ways that I think particularly leftists will understand. For me, trade wars are class wars. Therefore, it's not a clash between Germany and Greece, or China and the United States, or the European Union and the United States. It's a clash, a major clash, between the rentier class of the United States and the blue-collar workers of the United States, and also within Germany of the industrialists and the bankers on the one hand, and the German working class on the other. And so the true evil in what Donald Trump is doing is that, like every good fascist, when I say good, I mean consistent fascist, he's basing what he says on small truths in order to tell a big lie. So the small truth, or small truths, is that indeed a system of imbalanced trade, where you have Germany having a very large and almost permanent trade surplus with the south of Europe, with the United States, with the United Kingdom, that is unsustainable, and it is bad. But it is bad for the Germans, I would add, as I did. So this is the small truth. It's not a small truth, it's a sizable truth. But then he builds the grievances of the United States story on top of it, which is the big lie, the big fascist lie, I would say, because fascists are very good. I mean, Goebbels had developed a whole theory of propaganda on how to tell a big lie by basing it on truths. What is his profession, Donald Trump? He's a realtor. He's in the real estate business. Now, why is the real estate business in the United States so lucrative? Why has he made all these billions? And there are other developers who are even more successful than he is. Why is the rentier sector in the United States booming when the working class is suffering? The working class that, by the way, ironically elected Donald Trump, one of the realtors. Well, the reason is the trade deficit of the United States. Because the trade deficit of the United States, the fact that it has been deindustrializing, all the things that he correctly points out as a problem, this trade deficit becomes the engine that drives German industry, Japanese industry, Chinese industry. If you are an aluminum producer in Shanghai, you sell most of your produce to California. How can the Californians afford to buy your aluminum? Only because the American dollar permits American consumers of aluminum to use the power of the dollar to keep importing aluminum from Shanghai to California. In other words, the trade, that's what I mean when I say that the trade deficit of the United States is the source of demand and therefore of accumulation, of capital accumulation by the capitalists of the rest of the world. Now, what do they do with the dollars that they collect? They take it to New York through the banking system, Wall Street. They're not allowed to buy large companies like Microsoft, Google, and so on, because the United States government is very protectionist. But they are allowed to use their dollars that are the result of the American trade deficit to do two things. Buy real estate. That answers the question, why is somebody like Donald Trump rich? Because of the trade deficit of the United States, and buy American bonds, effectively American government debt, in the sense that the Chinese, the Japanese, the British, the Italian, the German capitalists are funding the American state and the American army. So you can't have it both ways, Donald Trump. You cannot, on the one hand, enjoy and celebrate your wealth, celebrate the fact that you have the world's mightiest army, and at the same time, not like the trade deficit, which makes this possible.
Because I mischaracterized your argument, let me try and sort of make sure I have got what you really mean. So the reason why a trade surplus is bad for the working class in, say, Germany or Japan is because to maintain a trade surplus, you have to suppress demand in that country. So sort of they're artificially suppressing wages in Germany to maintain the surplus. The reason it's problematic for Americans is that it will sort of deindustrialize that country. And you've also sort of explained there how it could cause asset inflation. Am I on the right track?
Precisely. You got it spot on.
So this does, though, lead to another question. So how, regardless of what's motivating Donald Trump, how should other countries respond? Because if sort of your argument is that sort of Germany having this surplus is problematic, China having this surplus is problematic, what they should actually just do is sort of inflate demand in their countries so that the working classes in those nations can have a better standard of living. Should, you know, in a way, should we be telling the EU, you know, this trade war from the Americans, it might have been motivated by sort of faulty or opportunistic logic by a very nasty person, but, you know, maybe you should take this as a wake-up call and you should sort of try and reduce your trade surplus with America. Is that what we should be sort of asking? Because I suppose the other option is to say, look, this is when we should stand together as Europeans against the Americans because they are trying to take us for a ride.
I think this is not an either or situation, it's both. By the way, what you said is what I've been saying now for decades, going blue in the face saying it. Part and parcel of the trade surplus of the Eurozone in relation to the United States is not only the suppression of demand, but also the suppression of investment. This emphasis on competitiveness that the Germans have, this fixation with competitiveness, it's almost a psychological disease. It goes hand in hand with low productivity, because these are two very different terms. You can become competitive by cutting wages, but you don't become more productive and you don't become more innovative. And competitiveness is a fool's wager. It is in the definition of a zero-sum game. So if I cut my wages relative to yours and I become more competitive relative to you, okay, I win, you lose. It's a zero-sum game. But nothing stops both of us from being more productive. But to be more productive, we need more investment. But when you run consistent, perpetual trade surpluses, as you said correctly, you reduce your demand domestically, which means you reduce your investment, because who's going to invest in a country where demand is low? So what Europe should have been doing, and this is what I was arguing 10 years ago when I was in the corridors of power in inverted commas in Brussels, and when I was in the ECOFIN, the Council of Finance Ministers, when I was governor of the European Investment Bank, I was saying, folks, we need to boost investment in Europe. And that is going to rebalance our trade as well. It will reduce our reliance on net exports, because that reliance is so catastrophic for Europe. You can see it now. You have a European economy which cannot generate enough demand within itself and relies on net exports to the United States and China, therefore increasing our dependence on the goodwill of the Chinese and Donald Trump. And the only way of doing that would be to find a way of, and they were very straightforward forward ways of doing that, of channeling all the accumulating liquidity in the banking system of Europe into productive investments. I will give you a very simple example that I've been advocating for now for, I think, 30 years. We have something called the European Investment Bank. It's there. It's in Luxembourg. It can do things. It's functioning. It's not a bad institution, actually. It's quite an efficient one. Imagine if there was another announcement saying that the EIB, the European Investment Bank, is going to issue 500 billion, $500 billion euros worth of its own bonds, which it already is issuing, and it will have the European Central Bank behind it in case those bonds prices start falling. That simple announcement would mean that they would sell like hotcakes, and then you would have €500 billion every year to invest in digital technology, in green energy, in the green transition, in all those things that we don't have and we desperately need in Europe. And that would have rebalanced our trade books as well, and it would have made us less dependent on Trump. But of course, the powers that be in Europe were not interested in that. They were only interested in the zero-sum game, in, cutting our nose to spite our face, in introducing austerity for the people of Greece and then for the people of Ireland, for the people of Portugal. So in a sense, Europe committed suicide. And Trump comes in, looks at Europe bleeding on the floor, and pokes fun at us.
I mean, let's talk about how the Europeans, in fact, sound like they're going to respond. So there was an article in the Financial Times today saying the Europeans are prepared to sort of target the American tech giants. They called it first use of a Brussels bazooka. So it's sounding very scary. I know you're no big fan of the American tech giants. Is using a Brussels bazooka against them a sort of reasonable response to Donald Trump if he were to apply tariffs to the European Union, as seems likely?
Since he was re-elected, the situation on the ground in Europe politically has been pathetic, miserable. The very stalwarts of the liberal establishment, from Macron to Scholz to, the whole gamut of the European radical center, as I call them, okay, who were aghast at the thought that Trump might win, suddenly became all Trumpists. They started indulging in this pathetic and contemptible race between them as to who would be the first to leak the great Donald Trump's boots. That was the first response, since you talked about responses. Now that they realize that, this guy actually meant it when he said that he was going to slap tariffs on EU exports, now they start trying to present themselves as tenacious and feisty. And they start talking about retaliation against the United States. Well, Michael, you can't retaliate when you are running a large trade surplus and you depend on it. So whatever they do to the big tech, techno-feudal lords, as I call them, of Silicon Valley, and I believe that they should have done a lot worse to them than what they are thinking of doing now. But it is irrelevant, because the problem that Germany has, the problem that France has, the problem that Italy has, is that capital, serious money, is migrating from Europe and is being invested in the United States. There is nothing that Brussels can do, tweaking the regulations for artificial intelligence and what Google can do or can't do, and what penalties they will make Google or Microsoft pay. None of that is going to stop this emigration, this tsunami of capital leaving Germany, leaving the heart of Europe for the United States. Now, this is not new. It's been happening for years now because of the of what we were saying, what I was talking about before. Even Biden's America First industrial policy that was misnamed as the Inflation Reduction Act had already started the process of companies like Volkswagen, like BASF, the great chemical corporation, shifting its investment to the United States. And now the prospect of these tariffs simply accelerates this process. When I look at Brussels and their pronouncements as to how they're going to deal with Trump, what I see is this pendulum of shame oscillating very fast between total capitulation to Washington and idiotic and utterly unbelievable threats.
Let's talk about techno-feudalism. So we sort of talked about trade imbalances and what you've written about that in the past, how that relates to now. I mean, techno-feudalism, your most recent book, you're sort of talking about how a few global tech firms are essentially controlling the entire economy and can tax every transaction we do. I think it's a strong argument. Were you celebrating sort of the rise of DeepSeek because that seemed to threaten the monopolistic power of those Silicon Valley, the AI giants at least?
Absolutely. I think it's a remarkable achievement. And I don't care whether it's Chinese, Eskimo, Norwegian, or Malaysian. Whoever created on a shoestring a competitor to that awful OpenAI's ChatGPT, which has a market capitalization that is mind-boggling. And the reason why it's mind-boggling, it is because of all the fees they were expecting to get from you and me for using what is a very useful tool, by the way. Okay, I'm not at all a tech skeptic. I believe that this technology is potentially extremely useful. And then you have this Chinese company, and at 1,000th of the cost, they produced a product which is even more useful than the American one. So this was a Sputnik moment. The Americans were absolutely convinced, both the American government, the American private sector, big tech, were convinced that they were, decades ahead of the rest of the world, of China. And suddenly, just like in the 50s, when the Soviets went to space before the Americans could launch a rocket, now they realize that this supposed heads up that they had was immaterial. And it destroyed their business model, which I'm very pleased to see, because as a Democrat, I believe in open source software. And what is astonishing about DeepSeek is not only that they are providing us with a service, and it's free, something that to get a similar quality of service from OpenAI, you would have to pay $200 a month. It's not only that, it's that they have published and made available to you and me, to everyone, especially to techies who are useful people unlike us. They provide them with the code. They said, look, this is how we made it. You can take it and make it yourself. And you can use it in any way you want. You don't have to store your data on our Chinese servers or on Google servers. Buy your own server and store your data there. Now, so yes, of course, that was a remarkable moment. But that is in no way denting the ironclad powers of what I call the cloud capital, which is the foundation of what I call techno-feudalism. Because what's inside our phone, and it's most powerful, is not an AI-based service. An AI-based service like ChatGPT or DeepSeek is a capitalist commodity. Like, it is no different to going to a restaurant and ordering a pizza. You order a commodity, you pay for it. Maybe it's given to you for free if somebody is nice enough, as DeepSeek are, but it's still a marketplace. The real power of big tech resides in Google, resides in Facebook, it resides in Instagram, in TikTok, in Airbnb, in Uber. These, what I call digital fiefdoms, because they're like fiefdoms that attract us. And once we're in there, we don't pay to get in there. You simply sign up, like you do when you use the Google search engine, when you enter Facebook and start posting articles or photographs or whatever. You get in there as a consumer, as a user, or as a producer, as Novara. You get in there as the Times of London, as a bicycle producer who enters Amazon. Jeff Bezos' digital fiefdom. So we are all gathered inside the digital walls of this fiefdom, and once we're in there, we get charged a rent. Just like in the feudal age, the landlords charged ground rent. These people, the tech lords, charge a cloud rent. And that's not a market. It's not a marketplace. It's a trading platform, but it is encased, it's owned like the landlords used to own the estates, the great estates. Now they own those digital fiefs. And once we're in there, we produce value for them. We reproduce their own cloud capital every time we post a video, a photograph. And that is not affected by a company like DeepSeek. Company like DeepSeek only wrecks the business model of companies like OpenAI that sell services for money.
The feudal analogy, I think, when it comes to these companies. I mean, if you work on this, obviously Novara Media, we work, as you say, within the walls of one of these platforms. YouTube take 45% of all ad revenue, right? And all they have to do is maintain the website. There's an enormous amount of rent that they are sort of consuming, which is why you can see how these companies become so profitable. Briefly on DeepSeek, because I know you sort of said you're a fan of open source. I mean, I am too. I do also, I understand the argument sort of about AI being dangerous and sort of, with nuclear weapons, right? We might sort of, in theory, like things to be open source, but you don't want the proliferation of nuclear weapons to any Tom, Dick and Harry who can sort of get their hands on them, right? So if AI, or I suppose, let's pose this as a question, do you take seriously those people who think that sort of AI proliferation could be a risk or even an existential risk to humanity?
Yes and no. You see, AI in itself is a very useful tool. Nuclear power, or energy, I don't think is a very good analogy because it's radioactive. So even if you try to use it for good purposes, you may get contaminated and get cancer. Whereas if you take DeepSeek's code and you use it in order to, as a musician, for instance, to come up with interesting compositions coming out of previous projects of yours or your friends' projects. There's no danger there of anything bad or ill happening to you or to your friends. So when it comes to cloud capital, artificial intelligence, algorithms, the key is who owns it. Not what is the machine capable of doing, but who owns it. Because when you have highly concentrated ownership, when AI is owned by Altman, right, who has proven to be not just a maverick, but a villain of the piece. And he can control all the learning that is based, and taking place in front of the eyes of young people. He can control everything they learn through the way that he programs it, and because he owns it, there's no way of checking how it is that he's programmed it. Then it becomes a clear and present danger to humanity. But if it is open source, then you can have access to a variety of different forms of AI. And in the end, the concentration of ownership rights is going to fizzle out. And as the concentration of ownership over these machines and algorithms and AI, bots and so on fizzles out, then their power to do ill and harm also fizzles out.
I mean, in a way, one way of interpreting that answer is you don't take the sort of traditional ideas of existential threat very seriously because, the people like Geoffrey Hinton, say, who was a DeepMind with Google, he's worried that these AI machines will get smarter than us and then enslave us. And then you've got other people sort of more security-minded who think that this is going to potentially make it much easier for, any kind of militant to create a chemical bioweapon or something like that. You're not really concerned about that. Your main concern is the extent to which AI can concentrate power among a few individuals.
You're right. I'm not worried about AI. I'm worried about humans. I'm worried about bad people, not bad machines. So the question is, who owns the machines and who can turn them against us and against themselves in the end, in a Frankenstein kind of Mary Shelley way. In the end, they can be tragic victims of their own hubris. So, no, I'm not worried about technology. I'm not worried about the machine itself. I'm worried about the highly unequal distribution of control and ownership over the machines. When I was beginning to write my book, which you kindly mentioned, Techno-Feudalism, the first thought that came to my mind was in response to your question. Science fiction is always, for me, a great guide in understanding the present, not so much the future, and what we must do in order to avert catastrophe. So if you look at all the Terminator movies, okay, the Terminator movies are all founded on this existentialist angst, the fear, and also The Matrix, if you remember that great movie of the early 1990s. The fear that at some point the machines will reach the point of singularity, which is when they become conscious, and they will realize what a silly bunch of idiots we humans are, and how imperfect and corrosive for the planet are, and they turn against us. I'm not worried about that. My book was all about the fact that a singularity of sorts has already taken place. That those machines, even though they don't have consciousness, and I don't think they will have consciousness for a very, very, very long time, if ever, they've already managed to create, on behalf of their owners, so much exorbitant power that they essentially killed capitalism while we were otherwise engaged with other projects and other concerns.
Do you think the left is still relevant in this moment? I think lots of people sort of looking around in terms of world politics. I mean, there are some exceptions, Mexico, of course, being a big one. But people look around the world, they say, it seems like the battle is between the populist nativist right and a struggling centre. There was obviously, a moment, you were a big figurehead in it, where it seemed like left populism was a big deal and it was a sort of shaping force within politics. You could sort of talk meaningfully about left populism being an alternative to right populism. That moment seems to be somewhat over. You could say the left appear at a low ebb, at least in the West. Do you agree with that? I mean, how are you sort of looking on the state of the left and progressive politics in the world right now?
Well, in exactly like the mid-war period, when the left lost, the left failed, the result was that the discontent caused by the crisis of this exploitative system we live in, call it what you may, the loss of the left, the failure of the left, in conjunction with the crisis and the discontent that the crisis begot, led to the rise of the fascists. And then you had this clash back in the 1930s between the Weimar liberal establishment and the fascists. And in the end, the Weimar liberal establishment rolled over and essentially paved the ground for the fascists. I see what is happening, what has been happening since our generation's 1929, which happened in 2008, again in Wall Street. I see a repetition of what happened, not as a farce, as Marx would have hoped, but as a postmodern version of it. There is this basic similarity. There are differences, of course, but you're quite right. The left will always be relevant, as long as there is an unequal distribution of property rights over the means of production, distribution, and now communication. As long as you have this exploitative relationship between the owners of the machines and the others, the vast majority who do not own machines and therefore have to submit themselves to the owners of the machines, as long as there is this incongruity, clash within the fabric of our society, the left will always be relevant. The question is, will the left be able to organize the many so that the common interest of the majority of the people, which exists, which is clearly in existence, can find political expression? As long as we're not doing it, we're going to be sandwiched between the authoritarianism of the fascists, of the Trumpists, of the Nationalist International, whatever you may call them, and the authoritarianism of the liberal establishment, of the radical center, of the Keir Starmers, of the Emmanuel Macrons of the world.
My final question was going to be about Keir Starmer, and I wasn't going to ask you how he's doing, because I thought that question would be a bit too easy, actually. So I'm going to ask you, should the left want Keir Starmer to succeed or to fail?
Well, to succeed in doing what? Firstly, I don't believe that Keir Starmer has a smidgen of an iota of an idea of what he really wants to do except being prime minister. It's not clear from his manifesto. I mean, there are just platitudes. Growth. He doesn't tell us what he wants to see growing, how he's going to achieve it. What I see in Keir Starmer from the first moment that he misled the membership of the Labour Party by promising them a continuation of the progressive 2019 manifesto, which he ditched immediately after that, betraying the people who voted for him to become the leader of the Labour Party. What I have seen him doing ever since was to expunge from Labour, from the Parliamentary Labour Party, from the grassroots organizations of Labour, all progressive forces, and to do it in a ruthless way, to do it also in a way which is supportive, and that is symbolic, importantly symbolic, of the genocide that's happening in Palestine. And in the end, I very much fear that his success will be detrimental to the interests of the working class of the middle class of civilized society in the United Kingdom and beyond. So this government needs to be treated with the contempt and anger that it deserves from the people who care about the people that Keir Starmer claims to care about, the working people.
I suppose the danger then is, though, if Keir Starmer loses the next election, it's either Nigel Farage or the Tories, right? So I suppose I think people are in a difficult situation right now, basically. But you think, sort of for principled reasons, just the guy's awful and we should will for him to fail. I mean, what would the pragmatist do in this situation? What is the hope, let's say? Is it to sort of start a party further to the left and try and sort of eke out an existence there? Or what would you recommend?
Well, Michael, look, let's say that you and I and everybody that's watching us on Novara Media, we all decide to be responsible and forget about our radical thinking and ideology. And in order to stop Farage and Braverman and the Tory riffraff getting back in, we back Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves to the hilt, right? They are going to fail because they are a miserable lot. You only have to look at every single decision Rachel Reeves has made. She remarkably and astonishingly prevented her own team from refurbishing the rules by which the Bank of England remunerates the City of London bankers when it comes to the reserves that they keep at the Bank of England. Do you know what this means? It means that she has effectively gifted the City of London, the bankers, she's gifted them about 35 to 40 billion a year. And all it took was a signature not to gift them money that they never earned and they should never have, while at the same time increasing the national insurance contributions by 25 billion and wrecking any chance of a serious increase in wages and maybe some increases in employment. So she doesn't need our opposition in order to guarantee her failure. So these people are failing. And they are failing as a result of not having the guts or the analytical power to oppose the City of London bankers, for instance, to do something about channeling all the excess liquidity in the financial circuits in Britain into productive investments. They keep talking about investment, but they are doing absolutely nothing. Yeah, they're talking about a third runway, for goodness sake, which is maybe ecologically catastrophic, but it is macroeconomically absolutely relevant. Absolutely relevant. So it doesn't really matter what you and I do, whether we support them. They are working for Farage. The reason why Farage is sort of edging above Labour in the latest opinion polls is because of Labour. It's not because you and I have not supported them to the hilt. So my answer to your question is straightforward. We should prepare for the calamity that they are driving themselves into. And the only way to do that, since you can't do it in the Labour Party, because if you are in the Labour Party and you do not succumb to their vile authoritarianism, you're thrown out. Look at Jeremy Corbyn, my friend, and look at even John McDonnell, who tries so hard to stay, another friend of mine, within, but there's no space in the Labour Party in which to be progressive and smart at the same time. So the answer to the question is yes, we need a new force. I would very much like to see the Independents, Jeremy, the Greens, not necessarily form a party, but collaborate, find a way of creating an electoral vehicle which will be able to pronounce a combination of rationality and progressivism that will be absolutely necessary for the time when the Tories, Reform, maybe some other dark forces emerge in order to rule that country.
Yannis Varoufakis, I'll have to let you go. Always a pleasure and a privilege to speak to you for Novara Media. So thank you so much for your time.
Ditto. Thank you, Michael.
That was Yannis Varoufakis speaking to me earlier today. We're going to end there. So thank you so much for watching Novara Live. Thank you to Ahmed Najjar for speaking to us earlier about Trump's disgraceful comments about Gaza. We'll be back tomorrow at 6 p.m. So for now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.